Hey there, Teisha here, and welcome to the Hurdle to Hope show. Here in the background this time you can see, I'm not sure if I'm cutting the top of it off. Hang on, I'll do that. And you can see that beautiful tree. That tree I often take photos of because it looks beautiful when the sun is setting. So I should do an introduction during sunset one time. But hopefully you've had a good week. It has actually got a bit of cabin fever here in the caravan because it was very wet for a couple of days, very windy, but we survived that. No trees fell down, so that was good. And yeah, very happy that it's a little bit chilly, but it is, as I record this, the first day of spring. So that's very exciting for us living here in Australia. On today's show, we have the incredible Michael Coles. Michael is an autistic advocate. He's a speaker. He's also a host of a podcast, the Deep Dive podcast, that really explores the nuanced experiences of neurodivergent individuals. So I love having guests that I can learn from, and you can as well. That's what Michael does. He brings us into his world, and we can all learn so much because as I become more aware of this space, we really do live in a world that is difficult to navigate if you are neurodivergent. So I hope you enjoy this conversation. We talk about experiences in the workplace, socially, relationships. So yeah, enjoy the conversation. And as always, I will be back after the interview. Welcome to the Hurdle to Hope show. I'm your host, Teisha Rose, and this podcast, it's about acknowledging that unexpected hurdles interrupt all of our lives, but it's how you respond that will define your experience. Each week, we'll be having real conversations with people whose lives have been interrupted and those who offer us support through our most challenging times. Each reminds us that even in the darkest moments, hope is always there. Welcome, Michael. Thank you so much for joining me here on the Hurdle to Hope show.
Thank you so much, Teisha. It's actually great to be here. And I didn't even find out about the Hurdle to Hope show until very recently. So it's actually really good to find out some more of these creators that are actually doing some wonderful work in this space.
And for those of you listening to us from out of Australia, I am right down the bottom of Australia in Victoria on my 100 acres of land, very cold at the moment. Mm-hmm. And Michael is on the sunny Gold Coast. So our lives are a bit different at the moment.
Well, it all depends on, the time of winter. Sometimes we do get very cold in the mornings and stuff like that, and it turns out to be a really lovely day. Other times it can be, just over 20 degrees, so it's still comfortable to sleep, but it's not sort of overly sort of like, cold. So yeah, so it does vary according to where you are in Queensland.
Yes. And for perspective, the dog's bowl full of water was frozen this morning. So it was very cold. Very cold.
I've suffered showers that iced up. So yeah, that's not pleasant either.
No. So Michael, can I ask you, how would you like to introduce yourself and what do you think is important for people to understand about you?
Okay, so I'll basically tell you a little bit of a backstory about me. I got diagnosed with a condition called PDD-NOS, which is post-developmental disorder not otherwise specified, back when I was 3, back in 1978. I was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome in 2010 when I was 35, re-diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder in 2017. Also got diagnosed with expressive language disorder and receptive language disorder in 2024, and I just got recently diagnosed with my ADHD diagnosis. So I'm officially ADHD. I had a meltdown, a very big autistic meltdown back in November 2023, where I had to sort of quit full-time work because basically there was a lot of changes in relation to my full-time job at that particular time. What actually occurred was basically sort of two of the people that I worked really close with and understood my autism actually left. So what the story was that basically I got my job through a disability employment provider at the particular time back in 2019. then what actually occurred was basically I sort of like, they didn't understand how I worked, how my autism worked, and all that type of thing. So I decided to basically sort of like, try and sort of ask questions. And with that particular job, I needed to sort of make sure that everything was 100% right. And everything was actually sort of like, making sure that every sort of single client had different sort of expectations and want to make sure everything was okay. But the problem was that basically this new person had their own ideas of how to do it. And then sort of like, I was basically sort of lumped with stuff that I wasn't really trained for. And the accommodations that I had were basically ignored. So what I did was I tried to explain it in a few meetings and stuff like that. I had written documents, working with Michael document and how my autism affects me and how my autism affects you. So they had sort of like, documentation to be able to do that. When I first got my job back in 2019, they got the report from the psychologist, and basically that's basically what they needed to do to be able to sort of like have work with me effectively. But the problem was also sort of like there was sort of issues in relation to one of my children getting discriminated and all that type of thing, and also them not understanding that, and also the fact that my job role actually changed, but then there wasn't any training to actually sort of do the job effectively. So the problem was that basically sort of like spiraled. I spiraled, and basically I thought worst case scenario and stuff like that. I was going to basically sort of lose my job and all that type of thing. But basically back in November the 2nd, 2023, my brain said basically enough, and basically I didn't want to do this job anymore. So basically I tried to power through, but the problem was that basically I plowed through, but that was the wrong thing to do. I rang 13 Health, which is the health line in Queensland, and I was basically telling them I was like, basically sort of like I had fingers tingling and all that type of thing, and I was in a really bad way at the particular time, and they called an ambulance. I had to go to hospital at that particular stage. So that's basically my story in a nutshell.
That's amazing. And I think it's really important for people to hear a story like that because the impact of not having the right environment for you, that's just immense.
The right environment, also the right accommodations to be able to do your job effectively. So
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest problem.
Yeah. So in that, because we'll go back to, childhood stuff later. Now that we're chatting about this is great in terms of with your workplace. What are some of the things that you would have liked your manager, your like new manager to do or colleagues to do?
Well, I tried to sort of like, have meetings with them and sort of like
Mhm.
explain what it was basically so I needed to do and stuff like that. With my previous manager, what they did was I was invited because I worked fairly closely with them. If there was any problems, I could actually sort of video chat with them and basically just talk to what issues and stuff like that I had at the particular time, and then basically sort of like try and work through those issues so we can get that right. And that worked really well in the past. But the problem was that basically this new manager had their own way of doing things. And I think there was some secret sort of things that I wasn't really sort of aware of, and I wasn't really sort of like, brought in on and stuff like that. So they were trying to sort of like, I felt like we was being pushed out, but I didn't know why it was being pushed out. Because, they just didn't tell me. So I really hated that and stuff like that. And I was trying to sort of like, just trying to sort of get above it all. But then they were trying to sort of literally burn me out. And that's when the autistic meltdown actually, and the burnout actually happened.
Yeah, and I hadn't been aware of that until chatting to a previous guest as well, and also Gian, who was on my podcast a few weeks ago talking about burnout for people living with autism. Is that something, is that what the tingling was and all? Was that actual
Yeah, it was a
burnout
symptom
or?
of burnout and stuff like that. And I was just, I was in a really bad way at the time. And then basically sort of my wife was basically sort of telling me at that particular stage to go to a GP and get some stress leave and get some stress leave signed off. But obviously the problem was that basically sort of my parents always told me to sort of work at 100%. But the problem was that basically I was working at 100% sort of like, literally, and you
Yeah.
can't do that forever. It just doesn't work that way because you can't work at 100% for, just ages and ages and ages and stuff like that without burning out. So it just doesn't work that way. And I think a lot of employers don't understand that.
Yeah, 100%. And then they don't get the best from you.
Yeah, exactly.
By,
And
yeah,
you want to get the best out, you want to get the best out of yourself and also to get best out of the employer. So it's sort of a two-way, always a two-way street.
yeah. And that two-way street involves communication and finding
Exactly.
out all your employees are different and finding out how to accommodate that.
And also sort of like, working out their ways of actually doing things because there's no one way of doing things. It's better to have that collaboration to get the right result out of you because it's sort of like, the collaboration is actually the best way of actually sort of getting the right result. And I think
Yeah.
that's the biggest thing and stuff like that that a lot of employers ignore straight
Yeah.
off the bat.
And with invisible disabilities, or like me with MS, which was very visible, it's really hard to get people to understand what you need.
Yeah, and I think like it's a shame that sort of like, I'm trying to sort of like create a business at the moment where I can do that one-on-one training and support and all that type of thing so we can get the best out of the autistic and ADHD employee because a lot of the time they're not supported. And I think sort of like having that support is really helpful and really beneficial to the employer. So it's time for actually sort of a bit of change and trying to sort of work towards those type of things and trying to make things work for the employee and the employer so they can make things sort of work for each other and stuff like that. So that's probably the best thing.
And I think too, lots of people do want to do the right thing and they need to be educated as well.
Yeah, and that's why I'm also doing the public speaking in relation to autistic burnout because not a lot of people learn about autistic burnout and the differences between typical burnout and autistic burnout because it's very, very different. And a lot of people sort of like, the masking thing is so detrimental to their own health if they sort of do it for far too long. So I think sort of having the accessibility to demask and be who you authentically are,
Yeah.
basically. Sorry about my sort of like, stuttering and all that type of thing.
No,
So just trying to sort of make sure that your authentic self, if that makes sense. Sorry,
yeah,
I'm a
no,
bit
no.
tongue-tied at the moment.
Yeah, no, that's all right. I lost my voice for over a year through muscle tension dysphonia. So people know my voice sounds really strange sometimes.
Mm.
So that's all good. But I do like that about that authenticity because it is exhausting trying to hide. I know it's exhausting trying to pretend to walk okay. So I assume you trying to fit into an environment that's not accommodating and then trying to pretend you're not different, that would be exhausting.
Yeah, and I think sort of the biggest thing for me is I think in the past they're trying to make sure you do things in the one way and all that type of thing. It just doesn't work anymore. I think sort of like having different sort of needs and validating those needs to be able to sort of make sure that they can be optimal in terms of their health and well-being. I think it's so essential to have that. And also, they've got different needs in terms of parenting and all that type of thing because autism and ADHD is usually hereditary. So you've got to sort of consider that, sorry if I'm saying a lot, but basically your children have those different types of needs or appointments that you have to go to as well to be able to optimize their needs as well. So you got to be there for them as well. And also the training is so important with them because not a lot of people have that training to be able to sort of like, deal with meltdowns and shutdowns and all that type of thing. And not a lot of people sort of know about that. So it's essential to sort of like realize that people need to have that training and support and all that type of thing when they have those issues prop up.
Yeah, 100%, because I didn't even know. And after your episode, I'll be on the next week's show will be Leticia, who we both know. And Leticia, in terms of putting together an app which helps to understand children
Mm.
who are neurodivergent. So I think that's really important because we were talking about the difference between it's not a tantrum, it's a sensory overload or a meltdown.
Yeah, it's basically an overload, and basically you need to sort of like, take yourself away from the situation to be able to calm yourself down. And I think it's so important to have.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about then what was your experience like? We've talked about your experience in the workplace, but take us back in terms of growing up. Did you feel different and did you feel like you're experiencing the world in a way that others didn't quite understand?
I felt like it was quirky and weird, but I like being quirky and weird. It's sort of like, being my authentic self, and I like to sort of be who I am and stuff like that. So I think sometimes that sort of some people either didn't understand that, or some people did understand that and just basically that's who Michael is and stuff like that. And, sometimes we do like Michael because of that, and sometimes I was bullied because of it. So
Yeah.
I think it all depends on the sort of like the person involved, but I did sort of feel like I was different. I mean, especially with my relationships, because I didn't have a proper relationship until it was like my early 30s or my late 20s actually. It was
Hmm.
29 to be sort of exact. But we had a long relationship for like about 6 years, and then sort of 6 months into a marriage, basically my first wife walked out. I didn't sort of know about my Asperger's in like great detail until that particular time. But I'm lucky enough now to actually sort of like I've married again, but
Hmm.
she was well aware about my Asperger's syndrome and basically trying to know about that and all that type of thing. So I think my wife now, she did actually know that I was Asperger's. I had
Hmm.
Asperger's, but I was looking at that as a crux at the particular time, but then I actually grew from that over that particular time. And now I've obviously got a daughter that sort of like has autism and ADHD as well. We can actually help support her with that. So we've actually learnt more as we went along, but obviously I've been learning and growing and stuff like that as things have evolved. I think 1 in 4 also have autism, ADHD, or neurodivergent trait. So I think sort of now, because there's now more acceptance and now more sort of knowledge about it, I think
Hmm.
sort of it's now more people are tending to now get formally diagnosed to get that support in the first place. But now I think everybody else knows what it is and stuff like that, or more people know what it is. There's more support now compared to what there was when in the 80s and 70s, 80s, and 90s, when basically sort of there wasn't that support there.
Yeah, and that's a real positive. So at the beginning, you mentioned you then got re-diagnosed. What was the motivation to get a new diagnosis?
Well, at that time, it was like when I got Asperger's or when I got
Mhm.
diagnosed with Asperger's, it was very much stigmatized at the moment. Um, and I didn't sort of like engage in therapy at the time because I felt it was very stigmatized. I was trying to sort of make sure that I was trying to be as normal as I can. But at the same time, my former workplace, before I had the current meltdown, basically sort of told me that I wasn't concentrating and all that type of thing. So, and I knew it was because my Asperger's and stuff like that had those autistic traits and stuff like that that I had, that they were noticing. So I needed to engage in therapy and basically get a report. So basically they sort of knew my sort of like quirks and all that type of thing and what support that I needed. But the
Mhm.
problem was that also at that particular stage, I think there was sort of like some people who didn't understand that at the particular time. And I needed to have so much support to be able to just work through my sort of like, quirks and traits and all that type of thing to make sure I wasn't as anxious or
Mhm.
wasn't as sort of like, as like, how do I describe it? It's not quite, yeah, not quite as anxious to a degree, I think, but it did take me a lot of time, like it up until now, to be able to fully sort of know how to demask properly. And I didn't even know that until after my meltdown, and I got some extra support and extra reports to be able to sort of know exactly how my brain actually works.
Yeah, okay. And that extra support through a psychologist or?
Well, it was psychology, speech therapy, and also occupational therapy. So I only had psychology up until late 2023. And then sort
Mhm.
of like I started seeing a occupational therapist and a speech therapist only at the start of last year. So I think sort of having that and also connecting with a lot of neurokin over the last 12 months, especially over the last 12 months. I think it's now 14 months now from memory.
Yeah.
Um, it's been really great to be sort of supported by those neurokin as well. And I think it's so important to have that because I didn't have that before. And it's sort of like, my acceptance and basically there's people there exactly who I am, exactly as I am and stuff like that. Unashamedly themselves, unashamedly authentic and basically being there, being themselves without sort
Okay.
of like, without apology.
Yeah. And sorry, is it a community group or something you mentioned?
Well, I was actually okay. So let me explain.
Yeah.
I was actually
Yeah.
sort of I've joined a group that Annie Crow runs called Neuro Access. We have sort of like monthly Zoom meetings and all that type of support. We have body doubling and we have sort of like a bulletin board. We can sort of discuss what issues that we've discovered with societal and basically sort of systematic issues that we've actually faced. I've also joined a neurodivergent business collective, which I think they've just rebranded to differently aligned, which is really good as well. And they've got lived experience professionals to be able to sort of like connect to. There's also a podcast which I started in June last year called the Deep Dive Podcast, which you basically sort of see here, which we just celebrated our first anniversary, and we've connected with a lot of autistic, ADHD, and neurodivergent individuals that live their own life unapologetically and also, trying to live their best life despite the fact they've got autism. I know that sounds wrong, but it's sort of like, they're living their best life um, as they're autistic, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. Sorry, I'm not making sense
No,
today.
no, no. It makes
Apologize.
perfect sense. It makes perfect sense because it's owning your own truth or being your authentic
Yeah.
self and not trying to hide that from anyone. And I think that's really important. And I think it opens things up and conversations up. And having a podcast providing that safe space must make a huge impact.
Yeah, and it's good to sort of like, talk to guests that basically have their own story, have their own unique story, because I think sort of having that power to present that story in a lot of detail and in a lot of questions and trying to sort of like get down deep into what it's all about. It's really good and all that type of thing. I do like having one-to-one conversations where we can sort of talk in depth about that particular subject or what makes them tick and all that type of thing. It's very cathartic to sort of have those like one-to-one conversations to be able to sort of like, find out who they are and trying to work out who they are and all that type of thing. So it's good to connect with other people who sort of like, is willing to listen in great depth and all that type of thing and having the sort of the capacity and the tolerance to be able to sort of go with my info dumps because I can go with info dumps for about 45 minutes sometimes if I'm passionate
Ah,
about something.
okay. Yeah, yeah. Which I do a lot of, not that extent, but I sometimes just blah, get everything out.
Well, it's sort of like, it's getting your passions out and basically describing your passions to a degree and basically it's great to learn from that.
Yeah, absolutely. And find out from other people and all what they're going through and identifying with parts of that as well.
Yeah.
So, if we were to think about people listening who this is all new to, they may have someone who is neurodivergent, their employees, one of their employees, and not sure. Some of this might be new to them, or someone at, I don't know, a local golf club or whatever it is that you come across. So, first of all, what's your biggest challenge in even socially interacting with people? So we'll talk about that and then we'll talk about what best for us to do.
Well, sometimes it's sort of like when there's new people, when they sort of you find out they have the same passions as you can connect with them. But the problem is basically sometimes they have that stereotypical view of autism and all that type
Mhm.
of thing. It's just trying to sort of like, it's sort of knowing what to say. Sometimes it's basically when it's a group, it's a little bit too loud and all that type of thing. So you've got sort of like, environments that are far too loud and far too sort of like, overstimulating for their own needs. Basically, sort of in the cafe, sometimes there's a lot of conversations going around and stuff like that, and there's a lot of things that's sort of like going on. So as long as you sort of like with my networking type of thing, I mean, I'm really good at it, but you kind of go have to go have a plan to go with it. So you have a little spiel in your head and basically go up and talk to them and basically sort of like, talk to them about what your sort of like, passions are and all that type of thing. And I tend to have a really good response. Sometimes when they're sort of like you don't know what to say to a degree. So it's sort of like, it's a little bit difficult to sort of you tend to be a bit reserved, and basically when you do get reserved, you sort of like you don't tend to talk a lot. So that's the problem I've had. If I have to sort of go into a new company and stuff like that, and I sort of don't know what to talk about, I tend to get reserved and I don't talk at all. So yeah, so that's sort of like, the two sort of things that I have. If I have a plan that I know and I know that I'm talking to people that sort of get this stuff, it's really good. But if there's social events where it's sort of like, I don't know what to do, you tend to get a bit silent. So that's the way. That's the two ways that I can that I sort of react in new situations.
Yeah, and I think that's good to let us know because sometimes if someone is reserved and quiet, you make assumptions as to why. They mightn't be understanding or they're just really shy. So that's really good insight for all of us.
And also sometimes I tend to retreat because it's sort of like overstimulating for us. I had a situation I think was a couple of weeks ago where sort of like, it was on the way home from holidays. I basically had a sort of like a overstimulating experience with a service center where there was basically sort of too many people and there was like too many things to look out for. And then sort of you get interrupted and then you sort of like you get a bit sort of like tense and all that type of thing, and then you do tend to be a bit aggravated by it. It's not their fault that they're sort of like, that I'm overstimulated, but it tends to grate on you a bit. So that's when things, if there's too many people there, it sort of tends to grate on you, and you just want to either retreat or you just basically just want to sort of like, just you need to basically calm down to a degree.
hmm So, in that situation, or what if someone knows that someone is neurodivergent? What type of things then is it that awareness, like meet up and don't go somewhere that's way too overstimulating, or what type of things can people do?
Sometimes it's sort of like, the online sort of chats can be really sort of beneficial because I mean, sort of you're in your own comfortable space and stuff like that, and you're able to sort of do that. Trying to force them to be something they're not is not the way to go either. So it's, basically sort of with new sort of things, I do have a support worker to be able to navigate the situations and trying to sort of like, not be dysregulated that I sort of say the wrong things or do the wrong things. So there's sort of like, support in that sort of space as well. But I didn't have that sort of space support before. So it's sort of like, it you try and do your best with what you can, but the problem is basically sometimes sort of people just don't understand.
Yeah, yeah, and that's why your podcast is so important and episodes like this where we can all understand and yeah, not have you feel uncomfortable or not part of all social gatherings.
Yeah, and I think sort of like, it's just it's not just social gathering. It's pretty
Yeah.
much in the workplace as well because it's sort of like, open plan officers are a killer for autistics.
Yeah.
And people are trying to sort of like, put open plan offices and stuff like that. And people are trying to get people back into the workplace, into the office. Like it's overstimulating enough to go on the train and all that type of thing without sort of having to try and do like 8 hours worth of work and then being worried about everything else that's going on, trying to make sure that sort of like, you please the manager, you please your clients and all that type of thing. So there's so many things you have to think of and all that type of thing. That's why I'm doing my own thing now because it's sort of like, I can do little small chunks at a time or one thing at a time rather than sort of like, having sort of 10 things on your plate and trying to sort of like overthink things and all that type of thing. And that's not healthy for autistic people as well. So I do have problems just dealing with more than one thing at a time. So it's sort of like that's the biggest problem with me. I'm big tongue tied today. I do apologize. I'm a little bit tired at the moment, but trying to sort of work out, basically, sort of like working with different people, working with different sort of personalities, and stereotypes, and also sort of the way they sort of view the world, politics, for example, office politics, and trying to sort of like make sure you obviously you do your job the best you can, but the problem is basically you get overlooked and stuff like that because you basically sort of you believe you've done the job 100% well, but then they you get overlooked for basically sort of promotions, for example, because obviously there's other people and stuff like that gets along better with the boss, or sort of like
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
you know yeah, that type of thing. So it's the office politics type of thing.
Yeah, and that's really hard. I think it's great that you're starting to do some consulting and meeting with employers because they're,
Well,
I'm
I'm starting
sure,
to. I haven't started that at offers yet, but I'm hoping to do that in the next few months.
well,
I'm trying to
we'll
sort of
put it
work
out
out.
there. We'll
I'm just trying to.
manifest it.
I'm trying to sort of work out ways on how to do this properly. So it's sort of, it's an idea at the moment, but just trying to sort of work out the correct way of actually sort of getting in there and trying to sort of work things out. Is
Yeah.
a bit of a challenge for me. So trying to sort of like, get those started. But once we get things started and try and get those conversations started, it'll be a lot easier once we get that support.
And there's lots of things I didn't even realize. Like I was part of the digital health festival, which was so, for me, I found it sensory overload. And talking to Leticia, saying there was nothing, no, headphones offered, there was no quiet space to go to. There was just nothing in the design of
Mm.
expos or conferences that
Yeah.
accommodate.
Well, I think the Ladybugs is probably the OG of these, the how a neurodivergent conference should be run. I think
Okay.
it's sort of like it's done really well. There's a 1 day online, not 1 day online, but it's actually 2 days on. It's 2 days online, one in person, but you can attend online if you want as well. But the in-person sort of thing is really sort of a way to actually sort of for autistic people to actually talk to each other. And
Mm.
there's ways of how they can actually sort of do that in a way that they can be authentic, be their full, authentic self without sort of trying to pretend, and having those accommodations there is actually sort of very attractive for autistic people to be able to be part of those conferences. And there's really inspiring speakers and stuff like that to be have be had at the Yellow But Ladybugs conference, and that's why they do it so well. I think sort of more having more conferences like that is so essential because neurodivergent people need to be included and they need to have their accommodations met. So I think that's where I sort of like, that's why I like more conferences to be sort of like the Yellow Ladybugs conference because it is so inspiring. There's accommodations to be met. There's obviously the lighting is low, and there's so many things that they do to be able to have that sort of basically have neurodivergent people feel included within that conference.
Yeah, that's great. So, what gives you hope about the future for your, for yourself, but also for the broader neurodivergent community?
I think we're getting a lot better in terms of getting that support there. I think with the NDIS, it's starting to get that support into place at the moment. I know for there's a matter of the matter of fact, I think the NDIS cuts may sort of bring that back, but
Hmm.
I think sort of having that sort of support, we didn't have that prior to the NDIS, so
Hmm.
I think it's very important for that to continue and for autistic people and neurodivergent people and ADHD people to be fully supported in the workplace, in their home, if they're sort of like struggling with their cleaning and their gardening and all that type of thing. I think it needs to continue, but also having that sort of like that sort of extra support when you need it, I think is so essential for autistic people to have because I think you I think you need that to be able to survive in this world that's essentially not built for us.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. Well, thank you so much for connecting with us. But before we go, I want to know, how can listeners connect with you? There's a QR code I see on your screen.
Okay, so we can go to deepdiveau.net. That's the main website. There's the Instagram, which is deepdiveau, which is through Instagram, through TikTok, and also through YouTube at the Deep Dive AU. So that's the best way of actually sort of looking at that. There's also the link tree, which you can actually look at through the QR code as well. That sort of links up to my link tree, linktr.ee/Michael Coles, if you sort of like listen to it through Spotify or Apple or something like that. You'll be able to sort of see all the links and stuff like that, and also all the interviews that I've been doing, and also some of the submissions that I've actually done with Department of Social Services, and all these things I'm trying to do to be able to sort of like, my public speaking profile, for example. You can have a look at that and get me to speak at your event, your conference, and also in the workplace as well. So speaking about that autistic experience and also autistic burnout is so important, and this message needs to be spread.
And the other one is also, we connected on LinkedIn. So also for businesses as well,
Yeah.
that could be a good spot to connect
Yeah,
with
if you
you.
connect through my link tree, that the
Yep, that's
LinkedIn
it.
page is there as well.
Excellent. And was there anything else that I haven't asked, or anything else that you would like to say?
I think you've covered everything at this stage, but I think sort of having that knowledge and experience and linking up with the rest of our neurodivergent community is so beneficial. And it's sort of people need to join us if they're neurodivergent or autistic, and we can help you to ride through the experiences of it.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much again for your time. It's really been nice getting to know you more and learning so much from you as well. So thank you, Michael. I
Thank,
appreciate it.
thank you so much, Teisha, for inviting me on your podcast. I hope it does really well. So I know it's doing really well at the moment, and I hope it does exponential things in the future. So I'm looking forward to sort of seeing how it expands and ramps up.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Michael. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Teisha.
Okay, so I'm in the same spot, but I am at a different angle, so you can see another view of our property here at Daisy Hill. Hopefully you really enjoyed that conversation with Michael. I certainly got so much out of it. I really love when people are so vulnerable to let us into their world, and think we actually can all do so much better to be more inclusive of those who are neurodivergent. As always, I'm just going to ask if you can share the Hurdle to Hope show with people you know will benefit from it. I really want to build this community and really give hope to everyone dealing with unexpected hurdles, because it can be a really lonely experience sometimes. And I think when we share our experiences, are vulnerable in that, are authentic about the challenges, then it really does help others. So share the podcast. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts, you can also check out Daisy Hill and what I look like on the YouTube channel at Hurdle to Hope. Have a great week, and I look forward to chatting to you next week. Bye. Thank you for joining me on the Hurdle to Hope show. Please help me spread the word. Share this episode or others to friends, family members who you think will benefit from these conversations. Don't forget, we're also on YouTube now at Hurdle to Hope is the channel. And if you need support, resources, or a speaker for an event, please visit hurdle2hope.com. Don't forget, Hurdle to Hope with the number 2. Enjoy your week, and if you're going through a difficult time, please remember, even in the darkest moments, hope is always there.